Afternoon, my name is Jim Conlan and welcome to the latest episode of our sports show. As you know, we've been previewing and airing live on air for the past month about our special feature. Obviously, we're in the heart of Munster Rugby here where we're sort of based as well. So obviously, it's a great premiere that we have. It's called Global Rugby Legends, My Life in Rugby. So we're looking at iconic players, not just in Ireland. Obviously, we're going all over the globe now in terms of getting an international perspective from former players who have played in Rugby World Cup finals, that have played in the highest Heineken Cup finals, that have played in the elite sort of club competitions of the world. And we've spoken to players from Northern Hemisphere countries, France, England, Ireland, Wales, Scotland and Italy, and Northern and Southern Hemisphere, Argentina, Australia, France, Australia, South Africa and New Zealand. And we're heading to the All Blacks. We're another All Black lined up to speak to us today. The third one, another All Black that has appeared in a Rugby World Cup and on numerous occasions as well. Actually was part of the Rugby World Cup side in 2011, as we know, that sort of broke the hoodoo in terms of New Zealand sort of rugby as well, in terms of getting over the finishing line. In total, he from 2006 to 2015, he made 28 appearances for New Zealand, scored 20 points. His club career as well, he's played for Canterbury, 73 appearances, 84 points. Crusaders, 154 appearances, 144 points. He's played in Japan as well for a couple of Lecce Steelers, and he also has played in New York as well. And a prominent scrum half. He had a ferocious battle with probably a good friend of his, Pierre Wipo, to gain that sort of scrum half jersey, which he got in 2007 for that Rugby World Cup. The one and only Andy Ellis. And Andy, first of all, I do believe growing up that you're the eldest of three siblings in your household in New Zealand. And tell me, did Amanda or Simon, were they sporty and were they just as good at sports as what older brother Andy was, or did they always look up to Andy? And or obviously did they have certain sporting attributes that even Andy Ellis was jealous about?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me on your show. This is it's an honour to come on, mate. Did they look up to me? No way. No. We had fierce battles in the backyard. It always helped that I was the oldest, obviously. But I think growing up in New Zealand, it's just kind of what we do. Any kind of balls, we're outside kicking around or playing. Played a lot of cricket and soccer and rugby in the backyard with the siblings, in our bare feet. And I think it's kind of just what we do here. And then naturally kind of, the same thing happens at schools and things like that. And it becomes a big part of kind of our culture, I suppose.
And I suppose, Andy, growing up, obviously the national sport in New Zealand is rugby. In terms of parents growing up, in terms of you starting out at 5 or 6, did you try yourself a variety of sports? Because obviously I think yourself, you played scrum half for most of your career. So I imagine at 9 or 10, you were probably not the biggest lad. You were probably a small sort of wee chap, a small sort of scrawny sort of chap growing up in terms of that. Obviously parents might have been worried that throw him into rugby, he might get sort of hurt in terms of that. So what was Andy Ellis, what was his first interaction with sort of sports? Did Mammy and Daddy introduce him to all different types of sports? And was it a family car that was constantly on the road with yourself, Amanda and Simon, or the parents bringing you left, right and centre all over the place?
My first introduction to rugby was 5 or 6 years old. As a young fella, my dad was the coach. It's sort of touched rugby for those first few years. But what you find is pretty much everyone every young 5 or 6 year old lad and a lot of girls now too will play rugby down at the local club. It's just kind of what sort of happens, over in New Zealand. So that's a big part of it. And what you quickly learn is it's just about having a lot of fun at that age. That's what I remember of those times. Dad coaching, and then we'd go to the club rooms afterwards, and you'd meet some of the senior players and mix and mingle, and that's often how your Saturday nights were sort of spent. Sort of understanding rugby culture and club room culture in New Zealand, and that's what we did. I played cricket in the summer, so I was rugby and cricket there are two kind of predominant sports over here. So yeah, that's what I did. start playing tackle at about 8 or 9 years old, and I think that's when the mums usually start to look a little bit like, ooh, okay, this is getting a little bit more serious. I was actually a bigger lad at that age, so I was a flanker. I played 6 or 8, number 8 actually mainly, right through. I played prop, loose head prop for a Canterbury under 52 kg or something like that. And then number 8 right through till I was 15 years old. And when I got to 15, Dad sort of pulled me aside and said, "Look, son, he wasn't when I was a big family, he just said, well, look, I don't think you're going to get any bigger than what you are now. So it might be time to change positions, and scrum half was kind of the obvious choice, I wasn't you're going to get anywhere near big enough to carry on playing number 8, and always had a good skill set, always loved throwing the ball around, kicking and passing and stuff. So that's kind of where I ended up slotting in, and my first season at scrum half was in our first 15 at school. So that's kind of how it evolved, and just naturally ended up playing 9.
And I suppose, Andy, you mentioned that obviously having that sort of intention and the aggression for sort of tackling in the prop aids and the starting off as youngster in a flanker role, all of a sudden now you're thrown into the back row, and you might be predominantly, I don't know if you're ambidextrous, whether you can sort of, each right hand is good with left, but we all sort of have a favorite sort of hand. I know I write with my right hand. Most things I do is my right hand. My left hand, it wouldn't be. I consider it lesser some than my right hand. My left hand would be. How is that for you? Because obviously you go in scrum half, and scrum halves, they have to be so flexible with their wrists in terms of the ability to go right, to go left, the same sort of strength in terms of their passing. Did you find that was a part of your game that you really had to work on at a young age? Was one side that bit weaker in terms of the wrist, where you found yourself, I was be able to swing a ball easily 30 yards out with your right, but when you had to go to the left to swing it 30 yards, was that a bit more challenging, or were you naturally left-handed, or were you ambidextrous?
It's a big part of our game, isn't it? Scrum half, to get the ball out and be able to pass pretty strong off both hands. I actually think what happened is that, I'm right-handed as well, so naturally my right-hand pass was the one I'd always had, and I had a good strong right-hand pass. I had an okay left-hand pass, because growing up playing a lot of touch rugby and stuff where you sort of have to pass both hands. But what I did find is that when I started really working on it and getting some good coaching on it in those first 15 years, was that my left-hand pass actually developed a lot better technique. So my right was just a natural, just fling it. But my left, I had to develop, good technique, got my feet closer to the ball, and my follow through was a bit better. Where I put my hands on the ball was slightly different to my right, but it was kind of the correct way. And then I was able to rip that out and work really hard and practice that left-hand pass. And ultimately, probably ended up being a better pass, that left-hand pass, just because I'd learned the technique and the some of the key points with the actual passing from a proper coach at that age. And then it was up to me to go away and work on it. And obviously, the same thing with my right hand pass. I learned those techniques, but I'd always revert back to that natural, I suppose I used to just fling it a little bit more, whereas the left was a lot more technically good. So yeah, that's interesting looking back on it now. That's probably what happened. I've never thought about it like that, but yeah, interesting.
And it's you bring up an interesting sort of point there, and I just want to have another question on that before we start to move on. In terms of you starting off, obviously you played an awful lot of sports, cricket. You played in the proper role, but all of a sudden a scrum half is very different in terms of the kicking game to a fly half. And one of the most important things with the scrum half is that box kick in the air, in terms of off the right boot, off the left boot. And sometimes when you're kicking at that, you don't have a real good angle or vision of what's sort of in front of you, like a fullback would have coming onto the ball kicking when it's scary or when he meets it. And same way a fly half, being able to spot the gaps. Was that something you had to develop, that punt sort of Gary Owen, that sort of box kick as well off both sides? Because a scrum half has got to be, if the right is blocked off, he has to be able to do that box kick off the left foot as well, and it can go straight out in the hole, as we know. So it's one of those sort of kicks that is a bit more difficult, I'd imagine, than trying to learn coming into that scrum half position at a young age.
Yeah, I mean that's a big part of the international game now too, isn't it? You see a lot of teams, you know, with the box kick and the really accurate ones and the wingers who are good in the air. It makes a big difference. Like it's just a skill set that just had to put a heap of time in and work really hard at, because it needs to be an accurate kick. It needs to be the right distance. It needs to be the right height. They say the distance about 28 meters is about the perfect distance. So the thousands of kicks I've done with a cone sitting 28 meters in front of me, and making sure that it's fairly straight, you know, it doesn't drift too far one way or the other. It's just a big part of the game, and it's a little bit like the passing, because, you know, I've done a lot of stuff with kids as well. Your box kicking and your passing, or your goal kicking, or a lot of these parts of the game, there's not really a secret to it. You can get some help with your technique, make sure you've got that right, but once you got that in place, it is absolutely about putting in the time, more and more time. The more dedicated you are, the more reps you do on it. You know, and then you develop your own sort of technique as well a little bit too. You know, you develop your own flow. You know, I think about passing. You know, your hands. It's all these little muscles in your hands that slowly get stronger and stronger the more you pass. Now, there's not anything else you can really do to strengthen them except the reps on passing. You know, so that's one thing I do tell young fellas is there's no real secrets. That you've just got to get out there. You've got to be really dedicated, and you got to put in hours and hours of work and love it. You know, that's the key to it.
Andy, I sort of drifted off topic there because you mentioned, so I'll get back to your sort of career as well. We're talking about you, not general sort of rugby in terms of that, but interesting to hear your points on that. The unique aspects is great, and obviously an awful lot to be learned for any youngster listening in terms of that. So thanks for sharing that with us. I'll get on to secondary school now. In terms of academics, were you academically bright? What area did the parents and family want you to pursue a career? Obviously, in New Zealand, we know that 1% of New Zealand rugby players go on to be an All Black. It's a low sort of percentage due to the overwhelming competition in terms of everyone wants to be an All Black in terms of anyone that plays rugby in New Zealand, while in terms of Australia, you might want to play Aussie rules, you might want to play cricket. In terms of if you're from England, it might be football in terms of that. So what was the academic-y sort of route that Andy Ellis found himself on? Did you like school? Did you like secondary school? And what was the aspiration if rugby hadn't taken off for you?
I don't think, I mean, I always was really passionate about rugby, loved it, but I never thought I would be able to be a professional rugby player. You know, that's, I mean, obviously every kid's dream, but a reality, probably not really. I applied for 2 high schools. I got into both of them. One was Christchurch Boys High School, which is one of the best rugby schools in New Zealand. And the other one is Burnside High School. It's a good, really big co-ed school, focuses more on music and the arts, and so my parents and I decided that I'd go to Burnside High School, and they had a rugby team, first 15, but they weren't in the top, even local competition. So yeah, I went to that school. Academically, I was middle of the road, really. You know, I probably didn't work hard enough, really. But the rugby side of it made the first 15 in 5th form, which is year 11 these days, and yeah, I played 3 seasons in the first 15, and we were sort of second division. I think we went up to the first division for one of those years, but we got beaten every game pretty convincingly. But had a fantastic coaches, and a great group of guys, you know, that I was in that team with, and just a real, probably those pivotal kind of years, you know, as a young teenage lad, you know, had good support from people older than me around, and was able to make good decisions most of the time. You know, and that kind of helped sort of shape me through my school years. I made a Canterbury under-16 team, but then I didn't make any teams after that. So I won a cricket scholarship when I finished school. So I was playing cricket in the summer still as well. won a cricket scholarship over to England and played for a local club in the Surrey League there for a year. So it was a bit of a gap year, I suppose, post school, and then came back and went to university after that year.
Okay, and Andy, Crusaders, obviously a big part of your history as well in terms of club rugby, 154 appearances for them, 144 points. How did the opportunity come about to be a Crusader in terms of linking up with the Crusaders? Were they after your signature for a while in terms of how did the opportunity come about for you? Was it a trial? Did you go through a second sort of string before you moved on to the first string? Or how did Andy Ellis, first of all, become a Crusader?
Yeah, well, I came back from England after playing cricket when I was 18 and went to university then. And rugby was still my passion. It was my real love, and so I played senior rugby when I got back, and I missed out on the Canterbury under-19 team, and that was the one I thought, I'd probably have to make if I was going to make it as a rugby player. So I made the Canterbury under-19 B side, and I remember that was a really pivotal moment for me because I sort of pulled over on the side of the road and when I got the news, and I was pretty upset, and I kind of had to make a decision at that point. Like, was I going to fully commit to rugby and give it a really good crack, or do I just go and get on the piss with my mates and have a good time at uni and not worry about this so much? I'm only in the Canterbury B team, and I made that decision that, bugger it, I'm going to give it a really good crack. And so I did. So made massive sacrifices, trained super hard, put a heap of time in, and had a really good Canterbury under-19B season with that team. And just so happened that Canterbury under-19B team played New Zealand under-21 in a trial game because the New Zealand under-21 team were getting ready for a tour. And I scored 3 tries in that game. I got a couple of turnovers, and the New Zealand under-21 coach said, I want that kid to come to the trial next year. And Canterbury said, no, we've got our A team, we've got 2 other halfbacks that are good to go. And he said, no, I want this kid to go. And so to cut a kind of long story short, I went to this under-21 trial out of the under-19Bs. I made the New Zealand under-21s, played really well for them. At the end of that campaign, I made the Canterbury team because I played well in this New Zealand setup. At the end of that Canterbury campaign, I made the Crusaders. And at the end of the Crusaders campaign, I made the All Blacks. So, like, literally within 12 months of me sitting on the side of the road going, what am I going to do here? 12 or sort of 15 months later, I was running out at Twickenham in front of a sellout versus England in my debut. And so it's a thing I like to talk to kids about, in particular, young people, like it's kind of all about how you kind of bounce in tough situations. What kind of decisions are you going to make when things aren't going your way? And I think that kind of will ultimately sort of defines you and defines what you kind of end up achieving a little bit. So yeah, that's kind of my story of how it happened. It happened really quickly, and it happened off the back of some good tough decisions with myself and some really hard work and no doubt a bit of fortune.
You mentioned that, obviously, Andy, and it's a meteoric sort of rise in terms of that, in terms of going from college to where you're thinking of dropping out from the sport to being an all-back. But I suppose probably looking about on that sort of game to yourself, and you're saying, in terms of that guy, that coach in New Zealand under-20s, he saw something there probably that no one else had probably seen there before, dare I say, in terms of hidden ability. So have you met him since? Have you started talking after that? Is he one of the guys that you say that when you play for under-21s that I owe him a great deal for what he sort of took a leap of faith or in me, and I felt I needed to repay him when I got that opportunity?
Yeah, I haven't talked to Bryce Woodward. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but yeah, I was very grateful at the time. I mean, guys like Robbie Deans were incredible as well for me. At the back of the Crusaders, he's a real people person and really looked after me off the back of that campaign as well. So there's a few people that I owe a bit to. But mate, I know you've talked to a heap of these rugby guys. I bet a lot of them kind of have similar stories too.
Yeah.
I know that in that All Black environment, when I got on there, it's often not the superstars right through school that go on and be professional players. It's the ones that had to go through a little bit of something tough, and whether it was they had to walk to training every day of their life or whatever it is. There's usually a reason they've had to fight through a bit of adversity to get to where they are. So I'm sure you've probably found that with a lot of people.
Conrad Smith had a similar sort of story as well in terms of his own sort of rise in terms of the All Blacks as well. He came sort of rapidly fast as well. So it's interesting to note that speaking to Matt Gisho as well from Australia, same sort of scenario. So he was playing in the sevens and he went from a sevens to a Wallaby within the space of 6 or 7 months. So obviously there is something in these sort of countries like Australia and New Zealand that if this spots a certain sort of talent in a player, that they're obviously, if someone believes in a player that much, they're obviously going to give them a chance. And you got that chance against England in Twickenham in 2006 when you made your debut. Did you feel that you had something, you still had to prove yourself coming in, given your sort of background in Rugby Union at that time? Obviously, in 2006, you were probably been there with the likes of Richie McCaw, I imagine would have been there in 2006, and Idols of New Zealand Rugby. Did you feel that, right, I need to show these guys, first of all, that I can take the hits, that I can command that leadership and I can command their respect as well?
They were all so good to me. That they, like, I think of guys like Leon McDonald, just basically put his arm around me through the week and said, this is just go out there and play, enjoy it. This is, play like you're a young fella again. Go out there and enjoy it. There's no pressure on you from us. We just want you to go and enjoy it. And that was really helpful because, mate, I tell you what, when you get presented an All Black jersey for your first test and you take it back to your room and you look at it sitting on your bed, it's pretty daunting. It's the legacy of that jersey is far scarier than any opposition you play. Yeah. And so, but you quickly learn that it's a pretty special armor when you put that on, and you got a job to do. So yeah, it was fantastic. That first game, the boys looked after me for sure.
And Andy, I suppose in under 20s with New Zealand, you were probably taught the haka. But in terms of when you came to the All Blacks squad, did Manu Nonu take you aside in terms of the Maori sorts of traditions, or were you very much aware of what that was on, or was it almost like role play? You just follow what the other lads were doing and hope for the best?
Mate, I tell you, it's like I was saying before, there's not many 5 or 6 year old kids that aren't playing rugby at lunchtime at school and every weekend. And what goes with that is the haka. So most kids are at home watching test matches and their dad's teaching them the haka, and they come in and the kids are all doing it at schools and stuff. So, mate, I've known the haka since I could start walking, But the cool thing with the haka is we do get like a kaumatua or a haka leader who comes in and just explains in a little bit more depth about what it means and why it's so special to this group and the country and these things. And then that's a really nice touch, when you start understanding that, when you're banging your feet on the ground, you're asking your ancestors to come and join you, sort of thing, So it was cool learning a little bit more about it in that environment and not just yelling it in a playground like I was when I was a kid.
Andy, we're going to move on now because time is catching up with us. The 2007 Rugby World Cup, a massive battle between yourself and Pierre Wakefield for that jersey. It was going down to that opening game in terms of who was going to get the sort of nod in terms of competition. And did you feel once you got that jersey in that competition from Wakefield sort of drove you even further? And obviously, we know in New Zealand in that Rugby World Cup, things didn't really go to plan in terms of what was the ambition. Obviously, we know South Africa, England, and it was probably a surprise because you went into with an awful lot of expectations on you, coming off a great sort of run of form as well. What were your own sort of memories? You look back at one as with disappointment and regret. Maybe do you feel that as a group that you sort of didn't reach your potential? That maybe did you feel that you peaked coming into the World Cup? And do you feel yourself that that battle with Pierre sort of helped you going into that World Cup?
There's no doubt the competition in halfbacks was strong, and it definitely made us all better. And we had, the good thing was, you know, all those New Zealand halfbacks at that time, we had good relationships. So you know, when we were training or working hard, we were genuine about helping each other to get better, because ultimately that allows you to be the best version of you as well. And so that really helped, you know, having a good relationship and working hard and helping each other get better. And then it was just up to the coaches who they wanted to select after that. You know, that World Cup was, it was disappointing. We'd been so sort of dominant, you know, leading in, and we had such a strong, experienced squad. It was a tough one. The reasons why, I think something we really reflected on after that was the mental side of the game. Yeah, we had a great game plan. We were well coached, but probably just hadn't put enough time into the mentality around it and dealing with pressure and different things like that. And so that was the big learning out of 2007. And when we look back, you know, across the other World Cups that we, you know, been 25 years nearly by the time that 2011 World Cup came around, that was a big part of it, you know, dominant teams, and we just didn't quite get it across the line. And so I invested a lot of time into the mindset, the dealing with pressure, errors, staying focused, a lot of that sort of stuff. And I think you saw the results in that 2011 World Cup. The first time we'd invested time into real, genuine time into it, and we got the results out of it.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, and obviously the mentality or the ethos, the mental strength of that 2011 group, there was no sort of fragility there in terms of if you went behind, if you took a knock, if you didn't took a dent, it didn't phase you. You sort of got that mental attitude. We know here in Ireland, we do so well in years leading up to World Cups or into World Cups, the tournament itself. We just fail to deliver every single time. We've knocked over South Africa and New Zealand there recently again, and the expectation is going up, but they're saying, oh, will Ireland fall flat in the World Cup again? But you had that sort of same sort of hysteria about you, but heading into before Rugby World Cups and then heading into that Rugby World Cup, what was the sort of the different sort of vibe in that 2011 group? And then obviously playing in New Zealand as well for that Rugby World Cup, that obviously adds the pressure even more in terms of expectation. So were you made of stronger stuff in terms of what was between the ears, dare I say?
Yeah, well, like I said, we put a lot of time into the mental skills side of the game. Massive amount of time. You know, I know Gilbert Anoka, Kerry Evans, guys came in and spent a lot of time, and it was amazing because it gave a sense of sort of confidence. You know, you're like, okay, if things don't go to plan on the field, or we make errors, or the ref makes a bad call, we can deal with that and we can shift onto the next job and stay focused. Whereas I think in the past, maybe in that French test, that quarterfinal in 2007, errors happened and we didn't really know how to deal with it. We got frustrated and weren't able to sort of click in and come together and get onto the next job. So yeah, we put a lot of time in, and in 2011 there were big pressure moments, there were errors made, there were refs calls, but we were able to adapt quickly on the field, and all the guys had strategies to deal with those things and move on quickly and focus back on getting our rugby right. So that was the biggest kind of difference. Now it was a Rugby World Cup in New Zealand as well, and so the whole country had come to a standstill. Like it was incredible. So there was a lot of pressure around that. You know, from everyone, friends, family, the whole country, mate, really. And I remember after that final, like sitting in the sheds, the feeling was, it was more like relief, like thank goodness, like like thank goodness, because this would not have been good if we didn't get this done. And then obviously the celebrations kicked in after that. But that was the
you would have been remembered as the Brazil team that played that lost 7-1 to Germany in the World Cup in Brazil. In terms of that
in
sort
Brazil.
of in terms of that memory. But Andy, obviously you World Cup winners medal. You decided then your family, you into people say, will Toulon come knocking? Will Toulouse, Biarritz? Will you probably go to England, Leicester Tigers, Sale, Gloucester, some of the big teams? Maybe you might follow some South Africans, go to Munster or Leinster. You took a different path. You went to Japan to go back to Steelers. Why Japan, dare I say?
Well, my parents actually worked there for a couple of years when we were growing up, and so we spent a little bit of time there and loved it. Loved the people, the culture. It was a really safe place. People are beautiful there. And so when it came up, it was sort of like I wanted to kind of stay in New Zealand as long as I could and play my kind of best rugby in New Zealand. And then after that, Japan was a little bit easier on the body. The seasons were shorter. We had nice big off seasons too, which was nice. So I could kind of extend my career out a little bit further there too. And then ended up just really loving it there. I got I fell in love with rugby again when I went to Japan. You know, we were playing at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then going and having a barbecue together, and all the family were there, and like the beautiful stuff that rugby is, you know, community and family and bringing people together. That's what I felt again, being in Japan. So I loved it, and I was happy there. I stayed there for 5 or 6 years, and and still got a great relationship with my club there now. And I actually I've just been over there with them for the last couple of weeks, just helping out a little bit with their preseason.
Okay, and Andy, I mentioned this now to a previous player. I mentioned to Dylan Armitage. I spoke to Dylan Armitage and asked him about joining Toulon in France, and I asked him if the chance for him to become a British and Irish Lion had came about, would he have gone to Toulon? And the answer was no. If Andy Ellis was playing in New Zealand and the Lions were coming to New Zealand, and there was an opportunity for Andy Ellis to be part of going up against the Lions, maybe it's after that World Cup in 2011, would Andy Ellis have gone to Japan, or would that Lions have meant so much to him that he would have said, right, I'm going to play against the Lions first and then venture off to Japan?
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely, I would. Black jersey for sure. You know, I stayed and fought hard for more tests. You know, but got to a point where I was really content and happy with what I'd achieved in New Zealand, and then that's when I left. You know, to Japan. So yeah, absolutely, mate. No doubt about it. Yeah, I'll definitely take more tests for the All Blacks.
Yeah, and would you have loved that experience to gone? You've gone against all the big teams in the world wearing that New Zealand jersey. Is the Lions, would have been a highlight for you to pitch yourself against the British and Irish Lions, given the history and mystique about the All Blacks against the Lions down through the decades?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's incredible stuff, isn't it? British and Irish Lions and the All Blacks stuff. So yeah, that would have been amazing to play in one of those series, but you know, they only come down every 12 years, so I kind of missed just either side of it. But yeah, I know it's a pretty special stuff.
And you got a call back to New Zealand again in 2015 to play against Samoa, and it's probably, I'd say it's a good sort of story, because in terms of the opportunity that came about, because it was a unique one in terms of players not being available and opportunities, and getting to play the All Black sort of jersey again. Was it a real sort of surprise to you as well after a 4-year, after 2011, to don the jersey again in 2015?
Yeah, it was great. I loved getting to wear the jersey again. Yeah, it was nice. You know, it was, like I say, I was pretty content at that stage too. You know, I've been in Japan, been coming forth, back and forth playing in Japan and for the Crusaders, and so yeah, getting called up to go and play the All Blacks was for the All Blacks was amazing. It was great to wear the jersey again.
And finally, we're coming to the final in now. Just two last questions. It's an Irish documentary, so we have to throw in an Irish sort of question to you. And obviously, in your position in scrum half, you might have come across Ireland a few times in terms of coming up against them. You were probably coming across a ball guy from Munster, a guy called Peter Stringer, I imagine would have been around in your time. Do you remember any battles with Peter or going up against Peter? And obviously, you locking eyes in terms of those sort of scrums and the conversations that went on. And did you respect and admire Peter Stringer as an opposite scrum half?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he was kind of one of my idols growing up. Him and George Gregan and these guys that had, weren't the biggest guys, but you could tell that they were so competitive and they fought so hard, and they were real leaders in their group. And Peter was one of those for sure. He did some pretty amazing things on the field. I can't remember any particular battles, but I mean, I was a bit younger when I first came along and getting to play against these older guys. And I remember the way that they'd talk to their forwards. It was amazing. I probably learned a lot off those sort of guys, those older guys when I first came along. They'd like demand good ball and excellence, and they were not scared of them. And all the big forwards would love being talked to like that. They'd turn around and be like, "Oh, yeah, thanks, mate. Yeah, I'll be better." So I remember that, and them yelling, "Get off the line and make some tackles," and all this sort of stuff. Just demanding out of their forwards. And so that's kind of the memories I have of those. The likes of Peter Stringer. Just a real leader.
And Andy Ellis, if you looked in the mirror and you saw an Andy Ellis in his pomp playing in the Rugby World Cup in 2011, looking back at you in terms of that reflection, how would you describe him as what rugby did to him in terms of his attributes, his skill set, and the man it made him today? Did really leave a lasting sort of legacy in his life?
Yeah, it's hard to understand at the time what a big thing is, being involved in winning a World Cup. Probably didn't understand that at the time. Absolutely dedicated everything I did to being part of that group and winning it. But yeah, it's amazing. Just the impact it's had since probably. I'm really proud of my rugby achievements, and they've definitely shaped me. But like it's certainly not kind of who I am. I've got a family, and I put a lot of time into the kids, and obviously I'm a husband as well, my wife, and I try to be a great husband. I try to be a great dad. Try and be a great friend. Try and do a lot of great stuff in the community, and I kind of think that's kind of who I am. As opposed to Andy Ellis, the rugby player. So yeah, that stuff shaped me, but I like to think that, when people look at me, they think I'm a good bugger,
Good burger. That's almost a sort of wallaby term there. Obviously, you wouldn't want to be saying sort of wallaby terms there in New Zealand. It wouldn't go down too well. But Andy Ellis,
mate, that's a Kiwi term, mate. Don't worry about that. That's like the Aussies trying to take the pavlova of us as well.
Andy Ellis, an absolute pleasure talking to you today to relive your career with New Zealand from 2006 to 2015. 28 appearances, 20 points, a career with Crusaders with 144 points in 154 appearances. Played in 2 World Cups in 2007, 2011. Also played in Japan, made his debut in England and against England in Twickenham as well. Thanks for sharing your stories about growing up, your paths. Obviously, some great tips there for youngsters in terms of playing the scrum half sort of position as well, that obviously dads in the Munster area listening into in terms of advising their kids going forward. Andy Ellis, an absolute pleasure talking to you today, sir. Thanks for sharing your stories, and God bless and stay safe.
Thanks for having me on, mate. Appreciate it. Cheers, James.